underdetermination of subjectivity causes an underdetermination of the subject-to-subject relationship. This is because now one has two subjects, although at first in such a way that no communication is possible, and the problem becomes one of how to bring the two torso subjects back together, end of quote. So what Heidegger reproaches a Cartesian epistemology here is that it creates a very artificial divide, first of all, between the cognizing subject and sort of an inert object, but then also between two cognizing subjects, which are artificially separated to generate an artificial problem for the epistemologist of how they can be brought together again, right? So there's just too much initial skepticism invested, and that creates, in Heidegger's view, who starts from that idea that subjects are always embedded sort of in a social context, then considered as an artificial kind of problem. So a third kind of difference between these two views is then that the Cartesian subject cannot rely on others, basically, in the generation of knowledge, right? You all heard of Descartes' famous cogito ergo sum. So I know and hence I am. So thanks to me generating absolutely and secure kind of knowledge, I can infer that I do really exist, and from there I try to rebuild a certainty about the external world, including others as well. In a social epistemological perspective, by contrast, you do not only have knowledge by testimony, so I believe in the knowledge of others, but also collective actors may hold epistemic states, so they also have cognitive power, right? As when sort of a small group of co-authors in a scientific project, for instance, generate knowledge together, or yes, when there are really big think tanks, right, generating knowledge. And last but not least, these two approaches have very different views on what sometimes is referred to as the problem of the other. So how can I be sure that the other person really exists, that the other person has really true beliefs, or that I really understand the other person? A Cartesian epistemologist here is a very strong skepticist and leads to, I mean, this really is the precondition of the problem of the other, which the social epistemologist then would basically describe as an artificial problem. We are always in interactions with others. We are taking for granted also the knowledge others have, if it's justified. If not, we can question it, obviously. I do not need additional absolute proof of others and their knowledge to exist. This is basically what is generated bottom up in everyday life. Okay, so then the phenomenological tradition in sociology does not only offer an institutional theory, but it comes with a much deeper anthropology and even social epistemology, which is very different from the Cartesian one, which, if you may have noticed, underlies certain postmodern approaches, right, when it comes to the other, ironically even. And it also has a certain correspondence with rational choice approaches in institutional theory, as when the starting point of a Cartesian epistemology is also the lonely individual, the lonely rational individual. And I wanted to end with a legacy also of the phenomenological tradition in sociology. And that is a brand of institutional theory called also sociological institutionalism. And in a famous article here by Rosemary Taylor and Peter Hall, is opposed to other kind of institutionalism, historical institutionalism, which we will briefly touch on as well later in another lecture, and above all, rational choice institutionalism. And this will also build the bridge to then the next lectures on rational choice theory. And I won't elaborate too much on it, but rational choice basically has a long history already. Even prior to the 19th century, thinkers like John Locke could be called precursors of rational choice theories. Then the 19th century saw the application of sort of the economic rational actor model of actions into then the description also of the social world. Think also of Weber's sort of instrumental rationality type of action, which he considered as only one of four action types. Think about then economists explaining at least economic behavior only with the help of these rational choice models, which then gained also their names in the post-Second World War. Rational choice institutionalism, as I said, starts also from the lonely actor, if you want, who then engages in sort of contractual interactions with other lonely actors in order to generate an institution if it's to a higher benefit than cost for every individual actor. So in that rational choice perspective, then you start from humans as calculating machines which are fully equipped with information and socialized, at least under-socialized, who then come together in rational agreements on setting up institutions whose function then is to generate efficient outcomes to coordination or also prisoner dilemmas. They feed back on individuals by way of constraint, which is expressed in a way the cost part of rational choice utility functions. They are justified by the very output they generate, right? They solve these problems, and the only mode of change they can undergo is if there's a radical external shock or an exogenously given preference change. And here are some authors associated with this approach nowadays. And presented in this very stylized form, you may already notice some of the cleavage lines that rational choice institutionalism has with the phenomenologically inspired sociological institutionalism, which, as we saw today, starts from that notion of incomplete human beings, where institutions come in basically as sort of completing social order, anthropological need in order for institutions that then also result not through contractual agreement, but they are implicitly and bottom up built up. So it's also a micro perspective on institutions, right? So this is something the two approaches here definitely share. We are talking about micro sociology now. Remember, we are in American sociology, where micro sociology became much more dominant, with the exception of Talcott Parsons, obviously, and where institutions then are rather defined as being the outcome of social interactions through what Berger-Luckmann then called as reciprocal typification of habitualized actions by types of actors. The very function of institutions is not so much consequentialist in terms of output or efficiency, but it's about stability and order, so doing what nature alone cannot do. And the type of influence is also not one of, let's say, cost constraint, but one of internalization of the norms predominant in institutional objectivity. then legitimacy is not done in an output legitimacy form, but it's basically always taken for granted. And there is the second order production of institutional reality, such that the second order legitimizing institutions are also built in the very same way as the first order institutions. The sociological institutionalism also has probably a more bottom-up model of social change. So institutions are sticky, inert phenomena, but we also saw that there are always these renegotiations of the social order going on, where incremental change is much more the model of institutional change implicit in this theory, which is defended by important late 20th century and 21st century actually figures still amongst us, still publishing authors mentioned here.